So, what if some of your relationship issues are not just attachment issues? What if there's actually more to this story and a little bit more trauma hiding in plain sight? Well, if you relate to fearful avoidant attachment patterns, things like pushing somebody away even though you really love them, there may be a little bit more to this story for you. And it might explain why some of the things that you've tried haven't worked. Because if you don't understand that CPTSD, complex post-traumatic stress disorder, may actually be a big root reason behind a lot of your patterns, you could keep blaming yourself for different behaviors that were essentially your brain's way of simply trying to protect you. So in today's video, we're going to break down everything you need to know about CPTSD and where there may be some overlap with fearful avoidant attachment style. We'll start by talking a little bit about what CPTSD actually is, how it's diagnosed, how common it is, how it really forms, and then we'll dive into the overlap with fearful avoidant attachment so that you can really see, is there more to this story for you specifically? So first and foremost, according to the American Psychological Association, CPTSD is a more chronic form of PTSD. Think of PTSD essentially as being a very traumatic event, like a car wreck or being caught in a natural disaster like an earthquake. And from such a peak event or a few peak series of events for things like war, you may have really extreme PTSD. But CPTSD is usually more continuous events that often, again, result from interpersonal dynamics that may not peak as much in intensity as something that would cause PTSD. However, what you would see is through a lot of repetition of lower level traumas that are still traumatic nonetheless, the impacts on your brain can be very similar. So if you imagine that being caught in an earthquake is something that might be a 10 out of 10 in terms of trauma, but let's say having a parent who is in active addiction and is neglectful and sometimes abusive in childhood, those things may be a constant 6, 7, or 8 out of 10. And CPTSD can have a really intense impact because the way that we get wired is through repetition and emotion. So arguably, the more repetitive something is, if there's also a strong emotional intensity, that's usually a big contributing factor to what fires and wires neural pathways. So repeated, consistent trauma throughout childhood can create very similar outcomes to traditional PTSD, but is often less recognized. Now, CPTSD often comes with a lot of difficulties with self-regulation, identity disturbances, chronic shame, and even relational challenges. And a lot of these things are outlined in the ICD-11, but not yet formally recognized in the DSM-5. And statistically, studies suggest up to 1 in 4 people with trauma symptoms may actually meet the criteria for complex post-traumatic stress disorder, especially those with a history of childhood trauma. So essentially, it's undiagnosed, especially in people who are functioning outwardly well. And remember, a lot of people who go through really challenging events in childhood learn to adapt to seem like they're doing really well on the outside, even though their internal life may feel like it's completely chaotic. And I'm going to keep going into this video, and I do want to share with you like all the key pillars to healing and just starting your journey. But before I do, just briefly, I want to let you know, if you want to dive more deeply, one of the key pillars to healing CPTSD is learning your needs and the ability to self-soothe. It's also things like regulating your nervous system, working through your relationship baggage and core wounds. And we'll get into that in a few minutes in the video. But if you want to check out our CPTSD healing course fully for free for a limited time, I will put a link down to that below. If you cancel before the 7th day, you'll never be charged anything. So you can literally resource this as a free course to just help you understand this a lot more deeply, because we go into it for 2 hours instead of this very short video. And on top of that, you actually get to keep our needs course for life. So you'll get to literally keep it, even if you cancel before day 7, for life. It's a $250 value. It's just a free gift to support you on your journey, and it will help you learn your needs in a relationship and the people around you through a series of really deep questions. So I hope this is helpful for you, but let's keep going back to the video. So what are some of the different symptoms that you would traditionally see with CPTSD? Well, you may see some emotional flashbacks. You may see a lot of chronic self-blame and self-loathing, being very hard on yourself, really beating yourself up in your internal dialogue, and a really negatively oriented self-perception. You may also see a lot of numbing activities, fears of relationships, yet sometimes wanting closeness at the same time. and hypervigilance, as well as dissociation. And when you look at dissociation, I think when people think of the term dissociation, they think of somebody being completely dissociated from themselves. But just like with anything else, dissociation exists along a continuum. In other words, somebody may literally be disconnected from their body in a more mild way, not really feeling their feelings in real time or recognizing what their boundaries are in real time if somebody's violating them, feeling sort of disconnected from knowing what their needs actually are, really this disconnect from these signals that your body would give you in real time so that you could tend to those things. And as a result of this, you may find that you get really angry after the fact. Maybe you feel like you violated your boundaries because you said yes to something that was a no for you. And this is a common theme in your life. Maybe you feel taken advantage of as a result, and also find yourself going through different patterns of self-silencing in the moment and then getting really angry, frustrated, or hurt later on. So how does CPTSD actually form? And then we'll talk a little bit about the overlap with fearful avoidant attachment style. Well, one of the most common themes is repeated relational trauma, especially from caregivers and during developmental years, which then leads to the nervous system basically being wired for both fear and intimacy seeking, which is a really intense foundation for the fearful avoidant attachment style. Now, let's look at some of the different examples that would commonly fit into this space. Number one would be something like having a parent in active addiction, especially if that parent is really in a lot of chaos themselves. Perhaps one day you come home and your parent is drinking and they're in a good mood and they're nice and you want that connection with them and it feels nice that they actually are receiving you and being kind to you. But another day they've drank even more and now they're angry and they're cruel and they're very scary or unpredictable. And maybe one day they're sobering up and it's like, what version am I going to get from them today? Are they going to be irritable because they're sobering up? Or are they going to be kind because they feel guilty about their behavior? And so you never know what version of somebody you're going to get. This could also include a parent with mental health issues that really has a lot of heightened instability in their mood, or a parent with narcissistic personality disorder, antisocial personality disorder. A lot of these types of dynamics would definitely fit how somebody growing up in a household or dynamic like this would find themselves going through these really intense shifts or extremes from wanting love, but fearing it simultaneously. And a lot of this very much fits into what it means to be a fearful avoidant attachment style. Of course, these are not the only ways. There can also be a lot of constant chaos in the home for a number of different reasons that could be a contributor to CPTSD. This could also be spending time in things like foster care growing up or experiencing abuse of different forms. But in all of these cases, especially when it comes to relationships, you start to see how somebody is literally going to be conditioned to want closeness and connection, but also be terribly afraid of it. Now, what are some of these parallels and how does this really feed into fearful avoidant attachment style? Well, what's really interesting is that the fearful avoidant attachment style often reflects a lot of the CPTSD patterns we generally see in relationships. Craving closeness, yet fearing betrayal or engulfment, and really hypervigilantly moving through life, and also moving quickly between extremes of protest behavior and withdrawal versus wanting and seeking that connection. And what you'll also see is that it's very common for fearful avoidants to struggle when it comes to regulating their emotions, often polarized between numbness and overwhelm. And CPTSD definitely fuels this push-pull behavior through a lot of these unresolved relationship fears. And another really common theme that you'll see is individuals with CPTSD are constantly stuck in over-exaggerated responses from sympathetic nervous system mode. In other words, you'll see somebody with CPTSD be in a lot of fight, flight, freeze, or fawn in regards to many of their behaviors. And fight doesn't mean you're always picking fights. Fight could mean that you're very defensive and you find yourself over defending yourself as soon as you feel attacked in any sort of small ways, but that could potentially put you into unhealthy or dangerous situations. You may also see different dynamics where there's a lot of fleeing all of a sudden, quitting jobs out of the blue, moving all of a sudden. A lot of these things would reflect being in this really intense sympathetic nervous system state far too often. And then you can think of your freeze or fawning, your people-pleasing response. And again, a lot of these things run in parallel together. Now, a lot of the time, what you may find is that if you just have a fearful avoidant attachment style, there's a lot of chaos in your relationships. It can feel like relationships are a roller coaster. But if you are struggling with CPTSD, you may see this spill out into all relationships, not just romantic relationships. And you may see that life goes through a series of events where there's a lot of chaos. And I want you to think about this for just a moment. Imagine that you are somebody who literally makes almost all of your decisions from fight, flight, freeze, or fawn. So you overdefend yourself, maybe leading to a lot of drama with friends, family, romantic relationships, even in the workplace. Maybe you freeze quite frequently in your life. You kind of avoid bills, tuck them away, don't look at things that make you feel uncomfortable and thus often don't address them, which then allows them to fester. And then you have this flight response where you may find yourself leaving situations very suddenly, whether that's relationships or friendships or career paths or commitments you've made to yourself or to your goals. And also this fawning response where you're saying yes to things that may actually truthfully be a no for you, but you don't even necessarily realize it because you were so disconnected from your own nervous system. Of course, through these different contexts and considerations, you could see why life would keep remaining in this state of chaos. So, what do you actually do about these different things? Well, first and foremost, I think it's really important to start recognizing that this is not something that is going to be an overnight shift, but there are major pillars you can target that can create amazing long-term results in your healing journey. Namely, first and foremost, to do somatic processing work, and that will really help you learn to move from constantly being in fight, flight, freeze, or fawn and into parasympathetic nervous system, this rest and digest mode where you will feel more present and more at peace in your body, able to interpret the different signals that are coming your way and able to recognize what emotions you're feeling and what needs that you have. On top of that, it is really important to rewire the core wounds that you have associated with trauma. What I mean by this in particular is that we often have dynamics where we go through traumatic events, and the way we store trauma is through the beliefs we make it mean about ourselves. So if you went through growing up in a very unhealthy, very chaotic environment, you make that mean perhaps, I am unsafe. And as you bring that sense of identity with you, constantly thinking you're unsafe in all kinds of dynamics and seeing yourself through that lens, that's going to create a lot more dysregulation, much more anxiety. Even if you're in a dynamic where years later you're out of that environment that caused the trauma, if you're still carrying that belief, you're likely to re-experience a lot of recurring thoughts and feelings that may even make you feel like you're going through re-traumatization. Another huge pillar is you have to learn who you are, really embrace who you are, what your identity is. And this really boils down to your needs, your interests, the things that you're passionate about, getting to know yourself the way that you would if you were dating somebody, asking them deep, meaningful questions, spending time to get to know them. You would do that with yourself in a more introspective way. And that includes learning your needs, learning the things that light you up, your goals and mission and vision for this sort of next season of life as you come back to yourself again. And also getting a better ability through nervous system regulation to learn your feelings, to learn your boundaries so that you are showing up for your true sense of self and identity. And last but not least, another really important thing that you're going to want to be able to do in your healing journey is learn to communicate in healthy ways. Oftentimes, CPTSD causes somebody to literally disconnect completely from vulnerability. Then as a result, they end up in relationship dynamics where they hope somebody would hear or understand them, but are often not giving other people in their lives the information they need in order to truly be considered. And this can leave you feeling frustrated, hurt, upset that people aren't seeing you and considering you in life. And a lot of times it's because that shield that you're carrying around with you, that invulnerability, is blocking you from building those more meaningful connections. Now, there's so much more we could go into here, but I also want to let you know we do have a CPTSD webinar style course you can check out fully for free again. And I will put the link to that below along with the nervous system course. You definitely using that link would be able to get through both of those courses in a week. And they will really help you navigate, like, what are the root causes, educate you more about different steps that you can take to truly begin your healing journey. So that's it for today. Thank you so much for stopping by and for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please like, share, and subscribe. And I can't wait to see you in the next one.